Chapter 5, Part 3 of Apologia Pro Vita Sua, by John Henry Cardinal Newman. There is only one other subject which I think it necessary to introduce here, as bearing on the vague suspicions which are attached in this country to the Catholic priesthood. It is one of which my accusers have before now said much, the charge of reserve and economy. They found it in no slight degree on what I have said on the subject in my History of the Arians, and a note upon one of my sermons in which I referred to it. The principle of reserve is also advocated by an admirable writer in 2 numbers of the Tracts of the Times, and of these I was editor. Now as to the economy itself, vide note F, the economy, end footnote. It is founded upon the words of our Lord, "Cast not your pearls before swine," and it was observed by the early Christians more or less, in their intercourse with the heathen populations among whom they lived. In the midst of the abominable idolatries and impurities of that fearful time, the rule of the economy was an imperative duty. But that rule, at least as I have explained and recommended it, in anything that I have written, did not go beyond 1. The concealing the truth when we could do so without deceit; 2. Stating it only partially; and 3. Representing it under the nearest form possible to a learner or inquirer, when he could not possibly understand it exactly. I conceive that to draw angels with wings is an instance of the third of these economical modes, and to avoid the question, "Do Christians believe in a Trinity?" by answering, "They believe in only one God," would be an instance of the second. As to the first, it is hardly an economy, but comes under what is called the disciplina arcani. The second and third economical modes Clement calls lying, means that a partial truth is in some sense a lie, as is also a representative truth. And this, I think, is about the long and the short of the ground of the accusation which has been so violently urged against me, as being a patron of the economy. Of late years I have come to think, as I believe most writers do, that Clement meant more than I have said. I used to think he used the word lie as a hyperbole, but I now believe that he, as other early Fathers, thought that under certain circumstances it was lawful to tell a lie. This doctrine I never maintained, though I used to think, as I do now, that the theory of the subject is surrounded with considerable difficulty, and it is not strange that I should say so, considering that great English writers declare without hesitation that in certain extreme cases, as to save life, honour, or even property, a lie is allowable. And thus I am brought to the direct question of truth, and of the truthfulness of Catholic priests generally, in their dealing with the world, as bearing on the general question of their honesty, and of their internal belief in their religious professions. It would answer no purpose, and it would be departing from the line of writing which I have been observing all along, if I entered into any formal discussion on this question. What I shall do here, as I have done in the foregoing pages, is to give my own testimony on the matter in question, and there to leave it. Now first I will say, that when I became a Catholic, nothing struck me more at once than the English outspoken manner of the priests. It was the same at Oscott, at Old Hall Green, at Usher. There was nothing of that smoothness or mannerism which is commonly imputed to them, and they were more natural and unaffected than many an Anglican clergyman. The many years which have passed since have only confirmed my first impression. I have ever found it in the priests of this diocese. Did I wish to point out a straightforward Englishman, I should instance the Bishop, who has, to our great benefit, for so many years presided over it. And next I was struck, when I had more opportunity of judging of the priests, by the simple faith in the Catholic creed and system, of which they always gave evidence, and which they never seemed to feel, in any sense at all, to be burdened. And now that I have been in the Church 19 years, I cannot recollect hearing a single instance in England of an infidel priest. Of course there are men from time to time who leave the Catholic Church for another religion, but I am speaking of cases when a man keeps a fair outside to the world and is a hollow hypocrite in his heart. I wonder that the self-devotion of our priests does not strike a Protestant in this point of view. What do they gain by professing a creed in which, if their enemies are to be credited, they really do not believe? What is their reward for committing themselves to a life of self-restraint and toil, and perhaps to a premature and miserable death? The Irish fever cut off between Liverpool and Leeds 30 priests and more, young men in the flower of their days, old men who seem entitled to some quiet time after their long toil. There was a bishop cut off in the north, but what had a man of his ecclesiastical rank to do with the drudgery and the danger of sick calls, except that Christian faith and charity constrained him? Priests volunteered for the dangerous service. It was the same with them on the first coming of the cholera, that mysterious awe-inspiring infliction. If they did not heartily believe in the creed of the Church, then I will say that the remarks of the Apostle had its fullest illustration. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most miserable. What could support a set of hypocrites in the presence of a deadly disorder, one of them following another in long order up the forlorn hope, and one after another perishing? And such I may say, in its substance, is every mission priest's life. He is ever ready to sacrifice himself for his people. Night and day, sick or well himself, in all weathers, off he is on the news of a sick call. The fact of a parishioner dying without the sacraments through his fault is terrible to him. Why terrible? If he has not a deep absolute faith, which he acts upon with a free service. Protestants admire this when they see it, but they do not seem to see as clearly that it excludes the very notion of hypocrisy. Sometimes when they reflect upon it, it leads them to remark on the wonderful discipline of Catholic priesthood. They say that no Church has so well ordered a clergy, and that in that respect it surpasses their own. They wish they could have such exact discipline among themselves. But is it an excellence which can be purchased? Is it a phenomenon which depends on nothing else than itself? Or is it an effect which has a cause? You cannot buy devotion at a price. It has never been heard of in the land of Canaan, neither has it been seen in Theman. The child of Agar, the merchants of Meran, none of these have known its way. What then is that wonderful charm, which makes 1,000 men act all in one way, and infuses a prompt obedience to rule, as if they were under some stern military compulsion? How difficult to find an answer, unless you will allow the obvious one, that they believe intensely what they profess. I cannot think what it can be, in a day like this, which keeps up the prejudice of this Protestant country against us, unless it be the vague charges which are drawn from our books of moral theology, and with short notice of the work in particular, which by our accusers is especially thrown into our teeth. I shall bring these observations to a close. St. Alfonso Liguori, then, it cannot be denied, lays down that an equivocation, that is, a play upon words, in which one sense is taken by the speaker, and another sense intended by him for the hearer, is allowable, if there is a just cause, that is, in an extraordinary case, and may even be confirmed by an oath. I shall give my opinion on this point as plainly as any Protestant can wish, and therefore I avow at once that in the department of morality, much as I admire the high points of the Italian character, I like the English rule of conduct better, but in saying so I am not, as will shortly be seen, saying anything disrespectful to St. Alfonso, who was a lover of truth, and whose intercession, I trust, I shall not lose, though on the matter under consideration I follow other guidance in preference to his. Now I make this remark first. Great English authors, Jeremy Taylor, Milton, Paley, Johnson, men of very different schools of thought, distinctly say that under certain extraordinary circumstances it is allowable to tell a lie. Taylor says, to tell a lie for charity, to save a man's life, the life of a friend, of a husband, of a prince, of a useful and public person, has not only been done at all times, but commended by great and wise and good men. Who would not save his father's life, at the charge of a harmless lie, from persecutors or tyrants? Again, Milton says, "What man in his sense would deny that there are those whom we have the best grounds for considering that we ought to deceive, as boys, madmen, the sick, the intoxicated, enemies, men in error, thieves?" I would ask, by which of these commandments is a lie forbidden? You will say, by the ninth. If then my lie does not injure my neighbour, certainly it is not forbidden by this commandment. Paley says, "There are falsehoods which are not lies, that is, which are not criminal." Johnson, "The general rule is that truth should never be violated. There must, however, be some exceptions. If, for instance, a murderer should ask you which way a man is gone." Now I am not using these instances as argumentum ad hominem, but the purpose of which I put them is this. 1. First, I have set down the distinct statements of Taylor, Milton, Paley, and Johnson. Now, would any one give ever so little weight to these statements in forming a real estimate of the veracity of the writers, if they now were alive? Were a man who is so fierce as St. Alfonso to meet Paley or Johnson to-morrow in society, would he look upon him as a liar, a knave, as dishonest and untrustworthy? I am sure he would not. Why then does he not deal out of the same measure to Catholic priests? If a copy of Scavini, which speaks of equivocation as being in a just cause allowable, be found in a student's room at Oscott, not Scavini himself, but even the unhappy student, who has what a Protestant calls a bad book in his possession, is judged to be for life unworthy of credit. Are all Protestant textbooks which are used at the University immaculate? Is it necessary to take for gospel every word of Aristotle's Ethics, or every assertion of Hay or Burnet on the Articles? Are textbooks the ultimate authority, or rather are they not manuals in the hands of a lecturer, and the groundwork of his remarks? But again, let us suppose, not the case of a student or of a professor, but of Scavini himself, or of St. Alfonso. Now here again I ask, since you would not scruple in holding Paley for an honest man, in spite of his defence of lying, why do you scruple at holding St. Alfonso honest? I am perfectly sure that you would not scruple at Paley personally. You might not agree with him, but you would not go further than to call him a bold thinker. Then why should St. Alfonso's person be odious to you, as well as his doctrine? Now I wish to tell you why you are not afraid of Paley, because you would say, when he advocated lying, he was taking extreme or special cases. You would have no fear of a man who you knew had shot a burglar dead in his own house, because you know you are not a burglar. So you would not think that Paley had a habit of telling lies in society, because in the case of a cruel alternative he thought it the lesser evil to tell a lie. Then why do you show such suspicion of a Catholic theologian, who speaks of certain extraordinary cases, in which an equivocation in a penitent cannot be visited by his confessor as if it were a sin? For this is the exact point of the question. But again, why does Paley, why does Jeremy Taylor, when no practical matter is actually before him, lay down a maxim about the lawfulness of lying, which will startle most readers? The reason is plain. He is forming a theory of morals, and he must treat every question in turn as it comes. And this is just what St. Alfonso or Scavini is doing. You only try your hand yourself at a treatise on the rules of morality, and you will see how difficult the work is. What is the definition of a lie? Can you give a better than that it is a sin against justice, as Taylor and Paley considered it? But, if so, how could it be a sin at all if your neighbour is not injured? If you do not like this definition, take another, and then, by means of that, perhaps you will be defending St. Alfonso's equivocation. However, this is what I insist upon, that St. Alfonso, as Paley, is considering the different portions of a large subject, and he must, on the subject of lying, give his judgment, though on that subject it is difficult to form any judgment which is satisfactory. But further still, you must not suppose that a philosopher or moralist uses in his own case the license which his theory itself would allow him. A man in his own person is guided by his own conscience, but in drawing out a system of rules he is obliged to go by logic, and follow the exact deduction of conclusion from conclusion, and must be sure that the whole system is coherent and one. You hear of even immoral or irreligious books being written by men of decent character. There is a late writer who says that David Hume's skeptical works are not at all the picture of the man. A priest might write a treatise which was really lax on the subject of lying, which might come under the condemnation of the Holy See, as some treatises on that score have already been condemned, and yet in his own person he is a rigorist. And in fact it is notorious for St. Alfonso's life that he, who has the repute of being so lax a moralist, had one of the most scrupulous and anxious of consciences himself. Nay, further than this, he was originally in the law, and on one occasion he was betrayed into the commission of what seems like a deceit, though it was an accident, and that was the very occasion of his leaving the profession and embracing the religious life. The account of this remarkable occurrence is told us in his life. Notwithstanding he had carefully examined over and over the details of the process, he was completely mistaken regarding the sense of one document, which constituted the right of the adverse party. The advocate of the Grand Duke perceived the mistake, but he allowed Alfonso to continue his eloquent address to the end, without interruption. As soon, however, as he finished, he rose and said with cutting coolness, "Sir, the case is not exactly what you suppose it to be. If you will review the process, and examine this paper attentively, you will find there precisely the contrary of all you have advanced." "Willingly," replied Alfonso, without hesitating. "The decision depends on this question, whether the fief were granted under the law of Lombardy or under the French law." The paper being examined, it was found that the Grand Duke's advocate was in the right. "Yes," said Alfonso, holding the paper in his hand, "I am wrong. I have been mistaken." A discovery so unexpected, and a fear of being accused of unfair dealings filled him with consternation and covered him with confusion, so much so that every one saw his emotion. It was in vain that the President Caravita, who loved him and knew his integrity, tried to console him by telling him that such mistakes were not uncommon, even among the first men at the bar. Alfonso would listen to nothing, but, overwhelmed with confusion, his head sunk on his breast, he said to himself, "World, I know you now. Courts of law, never shall you see me again." And turning his back on the assembly, he withdrew to his own house, increasingly repeating to himself, "World, I know you now." What annoyed him most was, that having studied and restudied the process during a whole month, without having discovered this important flaw, he could not understand how it had escaped his observation. And this is the man so easily scared at the very shadow of trickery, who is so flippantly pronounced to be a patron of lying. But in truth the Catholic theologian has objects in view which men in general little compass. He is not thinking of himself, but of a multitude of souls, sick souls, sinful souls, carried away by sin, full of evil, and he is trying with all his might to rescue them from their miserable state. And in order to save them from more heinous sins, he tries to the full extent that his conscience will allow him to go, to shut his eyes to such sin as are those sins yet lighter in character or degree. He knows perfectly well that, if he is as strict as he would wish to be, he shall be able to do nothing at all with the run of men, so he is as indulgent with them as ever he can be. Let it not be for an instant supposed that I allow of the maximum of doing evil that good may come; but keeping clear of this, there is a way of winning men from greater sins by winking for the time at the less, or at mere improprieties or faults. And this is the key to the difficulty which Catholic books of moral theology so often cause to the Protestant. They are intended for the confessor, and Protestants view them as intended for the preacher. 2. And I observe upon Taylor, Milton, and Paley thus: what would a Protestant clergyman say to me, if I accused him of teaching that a lie was allowable, and if, when he asked for my proof, I said in reply that such was the doctrine of Taylor and Milton? why he would sharply retort, "I am not bound by Taylor or Milton." And if I went on urging that Taylor was one of the authorities, he would answer, that Taylor was a great writer, but great writers were not therefore infallible. This is pretty much the answer which I make when I am considered in this matter a disciple of St. Alfonso. I plainly and positively state, and without any reserve, that I do not at all follow this holy and charitable man in this portion of his teaching. There are various schools of opinion allowed in the Church, and on this point I follow others. I follow Cardinal Gerdil and Natalis Alexander, nay, St. Augustine. I will quote one passage from Natalis Alexander. "They certainly lie, who utter the words of an oath, without the will to swear or bind themselves, or who make use of mental reservations and equivocations in swearing, since they signify by words what they have not in mind, contrary to the end for which language was instituted, namely, as signs of ideas. Or they mean something else than the words signify in themselves in the common custom of speech. And to take an instance, I do not believe any priest in England would dream of saying, 'My friend is not here,' meaning, 'He is not in my pocket or under my shoe.' Nor should any consideration make me say so myself. I do not think St. Alfonso would in his own case have said so, and he would have been as much shocked at Taylor and Paley as Protestants are at him." Vide Note G, Lying and Equivocation. And now if Protestants wish to know what our real teaching is, as on other subjects, so on that of lying, let them look not at our books of casuistry, but at our Catechism. Works on pathology do not give the best insight into the form and the harmony of the human frame. And, as it is with the body, so it is with the mind. The Catechism of the Council of Trent was drawn up for the express purpose of providing preachers with subjects for their sermons. And, as my whole work has been a defence of myself, I may here say that I rarely preach a sermon, but I go to this beautiful and complete Catechism to get both my matter and my doctrine. There we find the following notices about the duty of veracity: "Thou shalt not bear false witness," etc. Let attention be drawn to two laws contained in this commandment: the one forbidding false witness, the other bidding that, removing all pretence and deceit, we should measure our words and deeds by simple truth, as the Apostle admonished the Ephesians of that duty in these words, "Doing truth in charity, let us grow in Him through all things." To deceive by a lie in joke, or for the sake of compliment, though to no one there accrues loss or gain in consequence, nevertheless is altogether unworthy. For thus the Apostle admonishes, "Putting aside lying, speak ye truth." For therein is great danger of lapsing into frequent and more serious lying; and from lies and joke men gain the habit of lying, whence they gain the character of not being truthful; and thence again, in order to gain credence to their words, they find it necessary to make a practice of swearing. Nothing is more necessary for us than truth of testimony, in those things which we neither know ourselves nor can allowably be ignorant of; on which points there is extant that maxim of St. Augustine's, "Whoso conceals the truth, and whoso puts forth a lie, each is guilty; the one because he is not willing to do a service, the other because he has a wish to do a mischief." It is lawful at times to be silent about the truth, but out of a court of law. For in court, when a witness is interrogated by the judge according to law, the truth is wholly to be brought out. Witnesses, however, must beware lest, from overconfidence in their memory, they affirm for certain what they have not verified. In order that the faithful may with good will avoid the sin of lying, the parish priest shall set before them the extreme misery and turpitude of this wickedness. For in Holy Writ the devil is called the father of a lie, for, in that he did not remain in truth, he is a liar, and the father of a lie. He will add, with the view of ridding men of so great a crime, the evils which follow upon lying; and, whereas they are innumerable, he will point out at least the source and the general head of these mischiefs and calamities, namely, 1. How great is God's displeasure, and how great His hatred of a man who is insincere and a liar; 2. What little security there is that a man who is specially hated by God may not be visited by the heaviest punishments. 3. What more unclean and foul, as St. James says, than that a fountain by the same jet should send out sweet water and bitter? 4. For that tongue which just now praised God, next, as far as it lies, dishonours Him by lying. 5. In consequence, liars are shut out from the possession of heavenly beatitude. 6. That too is the worst evil of lying, that disease of the mind is generally incurable. Moreover, there is this harm too, and one of vast extent, and touching men generally, that by insincerity and lying, faith and truth are lost, which are the firmest bonds of human society, and, when they are lost, supreme confusion follows in life, so that men seem in nothing to differ from devils. Lastly, the parish priest will set those right who excuse their insincerity and allege the example of wise men, who, they say, are used to lie for an occasion. He will tell them what is most true, that the wisdom of the flesh is death. He will exhort his hearers to trust in God when they are in difficulties and straits, not to have recourse to the expedient of a lie. Those who throw the blame of their own lie on those who have already by a lie deceived them are to be taught that men must not revenge themselves, nor make up one evil by another. There is much more to the Catechism to the same effect, and it is of universal obligation, whereas the decision of a particular author in morals need not be accepted by any one. To one other authority I appeal on this subject, which commands from me attention of a special kind, for it is the teaching of a Father. It will serve to bring my work to a conclusion. St. Philip, says the Roman Oratorian who wrote his life, had a particular dislike of affectation both in himself and others, in speaking, in dressing, or in anything else. He avoided all ceremony which savoured of worldly compliment, always showed himself a great stickler for Christian simplicity in everything, so that, when he had to deal with men of worldly prudence, he did not very readily accommodate himself to them. And he avoided as much as possible having anything to do with two-faced persons, who did not go simply and straightforward to work in their transactions. As for liars, he could not endure them, and he was continually reminding his spiritual children to avoid them as they would a pestilence. These are the principles on which I have acted before I was a Catholic. These are the principles which, I trust, will be my stay and guidance to the end. I have closed this history of myself with St. Philip's name upon St. Philip's feast day, and having done so, to whom can I more suitably offer it as a memorial of affection and gratitude than to St. Philip's son, my dearest brothers of this house, the priests of the Birmingham Oratory, Ambrose St. John, Henry Austin Mills, Henry Biddleston, Edward Caswall, William Payne Neville, and Henry Ignatius Dudley Ryder, who have been so faithful to me, who have been so sensitive of my needs, who have been so indulgent to my failings, who have carried me through so many trials, who have grudged no sacrifice, if I asked for it, who have been so cheerful under discouragement of my causing, who have done so many good works and let me have the credit of them, with whom I have lived so long, with whom I hope to die. And to you especially, dear Ambrose St. John, whom God gave me, when He took every one else away, who are the link between my old life and my new, who have now for 21 years been so devoted to me, so patient, so zealous, so tender, who have let me lean so hard upon you, who have watched me so narrowly, who have never thought of yourself, if I was in question. And in you I gather up and bear in memory those familiar affectionate companions and counsellors, who in Oxford were given to me one after another to be my daily solace and relief, and all those others, of great name and high example, who were my thorough friends, and showed me true attachment in times long past, and also those many younger men, whether I knew them or not, who have never been disloyal to me by word or deed. And, of all these, thus various in relations to me, those morely especially, who have since joined the Catholic Church. And I earnestly pray for this whole company, with a hope against hope, that all of us, who once were so united and so happy in our union, may even now be brought at length, by the power of the divine will, into one fold and under one shepherd. May 26, 1864, in Festo Corpus Christi.